Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Vedic Astrology podcast. My name is Fiona Marks, and I am super excited to be here today because I have a special guest with me, Corey Dowds, and we are going to be looking at Vedic astrology and predictions. Corey and I actually share the same teacher. We both have a connection with Ryan Kozak. However, we don't know each other. We haven't met. And in September last year, September 2021, Corey, you happened to share on Instagram a reflection on your prediction about the eclipse in December 2019.
Yeah.
You can put in 26 December 2019 in Capricorn. If you're looking through the tropical Ayanamsha perspective, we had the Sun, Moon, Ketu, Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto all in Capricorn. The eclipse itself was visible in Saudi Arabia, Oman, southern India, and parts of Indonesia. There was a Rasi aspect from Mars in Scorpio. Rahu was in Cancer, and Mercury was in Sagittarius. Venus was in Aquarius. And being as we are honoring our outer planets in the case study today, I should also say that Neptune was in Pisces at the time, and Uranus was in Taurus. And I loved that Instagram post because of all of your accurate content, first of all, but second, because I'm really interested in what we can learn from reflecting on our predictions. I was super inspired to record this episode. So can you tell us a little bit about how it was that you got into predictive astrology?
I guess when I approached astrology, I read the book Autobiography of a Yogi, and maybe in a way that kind of spoiled me because there's a chapter that really says a lot of big things about astrology from Sri Yukteswar, this enlightened master. And I was just convinced that, okay, like astrology, they really can predict the future. They can tell you things, they can tell you to wear a certain gem and do this or that, and it will work, it will do things. So some of that was maybe a little bit of naivete, but a lot of that I actually found was the case after a lot of effort and a lot of training. And I actually, when it was around 2012 when I was studying astrology, and I had read all of the books available at that time. YouTube astrology wasn't even a thing at that time. And I was still just praying for a teacher or a better system. I actually had a nervous breakdown on my birthday in 2012 that I could not find the real Vedic astrology that I truly believed existed. And if within a few weeks of that time, Ryan sends me an email, goes, yeah, just so you know, I'm studying with this crazy guy named Ernst Wilhelm, and I just think you should check him out. And I don't know what to tell you exactly just yet, but check it out. And, I respected Ryan so much. And that basically led me to a much more, what I felt was a much more the type of astrology that I really wanted. That was very, I guess, kind of concrete. It was hard to find that at the time because in the modern world of astrology, there is sort of, I guess in the Western world that I'm in, it's people are like afraid to make predictions, or you're not supposed to, or it's sort of like Americans don't want that. And they even oftentimes say it's not possible. And that just annoyed me. So to put it simply, I wanted to prove a lot of people wrong. I really believe that Vedic astrology can deliver, and I still believe that. And that's kind of my life's work, is to build a case for that.
Good on you taking on that mission. There you are. You heard the call and you've answered it. And when we think about predictive astrology, do you have a favorite? Do you like to do mundane astrology? Do you like to do Prasna? Do you like to do personal predictions for clients? Or all of them are good? Tell us about your favorite.
I have gotten recently very into mundane astrology and the world events, but it's but my main focus has been natal astrology, working with people one-on-one. I myself was very I'm a very psychologically centered person, and I just love to be able to understand people really deeply and stuff. And I almost became a psychologist when I was younger. Working with people at more of a kind of healing, wellness, psychological, therapeutic level was what I've been doing this whole time and what I still mainly do. But in my own chart, in the last, I guess it was actually 2020, in my own chart that I realized I just kept getting this urge to get more into actually financial astrology. And because of my chart, it spoke to that, where I have Rahu in the second house. And the second house has a lot to do with finances and how you make your money and managing those things for those that aren't aware. And so if you, wherever Rahu's at in your chart, it's actually good to work on that area, even though you may think you need to do, that's the last thing you should do. And so I actually experimented and found, wow, this financial astrology stuff's really taking off for me. And it's really making my self-worth and my self-esteem much better to see. I guess with a lot of what I was doing with people, you don't really see the concrete examples. You know, if someone asks me, hey, should I date this person? I say yes or no, or this or that. What do I really know? It's so subjective. And so I guess getting into the markets and financial astrology, and as well as mundane astrology, these things are really cool because you just see concrete yes or no's. You know, you have an objective data set when it comes to a marketplace, you know, or the world. And yeah, the economy is either going to go up or down next year. And I will know. I can Google it and confirm it and know if I was right or wrong. Whereas it's just, there's more, I don't know, there's a lot more that you can learn there. You can really know if your techniques are working. Whereas when you work with other people, whether they share or tell you if something works, I don't know, there's just so much more gray area when you're working with people on a one-on-one basis. Does that make sense?
It really does, Corey. I find that as well. When someone asks you, when a person asks you for a personal prediction and they're looking for good or bad, you know, avoiding suffering, you know, what would be the good thing for me to do here? It's very subjective, as you mentioned, what good is, because sometimes it's those hardest moments that bring us good rewards or great rewards. And you talked about one, you know, you had a personal breakdown on your birthday.
Right.
You know, some astrologer may have said, you know, I can see a crisis coming up. You need to take your foot off the pedal. You need to stop stressing about Vedic astrology. You know, I can see that this is just really going to bring things to a head. It's not good. You need to, you know, widen your perspective or something. And if they had done that, would you have missed this crisis that then would have prompted, you know, who knows? So I think with personal predictions, this idea, the whole subjective comes in. Whereas I'm very attracted to what you're saying, that when things are external, we can observe. And this is where we can learn and improve on our predictions, which is what I'm very interested in speaking to you about in our podcast today.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I really agree with that. I might never be who I am right now if I hadn't had that nervous breakdown. Yeah.
Yes. And this is the same. If a client is asking you about the ending a relationship or leaving a job, these are all laden with extremely subjective, what is good, what is best. Yeah. But Corey, I'm glad that you mentioned financial astrology because it is something that you've been working on more recently. And am I right in thinking that your work is now available on teachable.com?
Yes, that's correct. I just started building up a Ayurveda University, a school to learn Vedic astrology on teachable.com. And I'm planning on teaching a lot more. I'll even be able to have a subscription-based service for people who don't really study astrology, but they want to just get my market forecasts. So you guys definitely check me out on Teachable if you get a chance.
Great. And I will put that link in our information at the bottom of this podcast and in the show notes, so you can follow up and see all of the offerings that Corey has. And I have another special event that I am doing with Corey as well on the 6th of February. If you are listening to this before the 6th of February 2022, Corey and I are going to get together at AstroliJam, which is my collaborative space for astrologers to jam together like musicians. We can play the riffs that we think are fun and talk to each other about how we came up with that and why it works and where it doesn't work. And on the 6th of February, we are going to have a look at a date. And we're going to look at an eclipse. You'll have a chance to prepare in advance, bring along your insights. Corey and I will share mine and we'll build up, see if we can really get some accuracy about what we think this eclipse might be about. I'm super excited about that, Corey.
Yeah, me too.
Good. All right. So let us get on to talking about the nature of prediction for an astrologer, because it's something that goes hand in hand with being an astrologer. But as you say, culturally in the US, we've moved towards more like the psychological astrology, and we've moved away from the predictive side of astrology. But as soon as you start becoming a student of astrology, someone wants to know what they should do about this or what will happen about that. So it's definitely part of the context of learning to be an astrologer or being an astrologer. And I wanted to share just a short passage from a book by Bernadette Brady. The book is called Predictive Astrology, The Eagle and the Lark. Have you had a chance to look at that book, Corey?
Yes, that's an amazing book. And I usually let that book be one of the foundational guidelines for the eclipses based on the Saros cycles that she explains in that book. And in general, her skill and her understanding and the things she teaches in that book are very good. Yeah.
Yeah, it's such a foundational text for us. And I'm just going to read a short portion. I think this is even from the introduction. And it says, since time began, the human race has quested for the future, whether it was the knowledge of a successful hunt, the weather patterns, the movements of an enemy, or the outcome of a journey. To know the future was to have an advantage. This need was so great that every tribe or clan had its own seer, sage, shaman, or priest. This person's role was to explain the unexplainable and give meanings and patterns to seemingly random events, thereby reducing fear and creating greater stability. The human race has come a long way, but the need for the seer has not. There are many pathways which lend themselves to the ancient projection of seership. Scientists predicting outcomes, the Bureau of Meteorology predicting weather, election forecasting predicting results, and the economist predicting the economy, etc. Thus, when we decide to study astrology to fill our own needs, all too often within a few weeks of commencing study, the students' friends will not only want to know about themselves, but also want to know the student sees. The student's personal quest for the truth through astrology and the meaning and astrology of life thus becomes burdened with the community's ancient longing for a seer. And she goes on to talk about how these expectations weigh and shape the journey of an astrology student, creating unrealistic goals for the student. And I think maybe we all go through that when we're learning astrology. We really think that we should be able to pull out super specific, exact predictions for every single person who comes to us. And so then she goes on to say that the first point to be made about the pursuit of reliable predictive astrology is recognize that you can already predict using astrology and how impressive this is to the layperson. And she gives then some examples she talks about Pluto transiting the ascendant, but just some simple things that we can do. And I love this because I think as students, we do put really high expectations on ourselves and we forget how miraculous it is that we can predict anything at all. We get hung up on the detail of what we didn't articulate, what we left out. Suddenly that begins to weigh on our mind as we get feedback about our predictions, when in fact just being in the ballpark is really beyond random chance. It's something that we should really celebrate about astrology. Can you relate to that? Any pressure that you felt to do the world's best predictions?
Like I said, I really expected astrology to really deliver, and so I was kind of rigid, at least initially, because I had to. I put a lot of expectation on myself. I think that was good, though. Again, like we talked about, I think that as time goes on, there's just so much terms and jargon and all this stuff. You just have to kind of let that stuff grow with you, and then one day, like everything you've been memorizing just layers itself, and then boom, a prediction kind of reveals itself more to you. And actually, that's a really good point. You shouldn't try to force predictions. In Vedic mythology, Jupiter and Venus are the priests or the Brahmins of 9 planets, and they're the ones that deal with astrology and being learned. And Venus is said to be the better predictor. And Venus is really more of, again, it's the water element, like what Fiona and I were talking about before we started recording. It's very relational. It's very, it's like emotional intelligence rather than just IQ type of intelligence. And I truly feel like my best predictions come from first, just really kind of getting a feel for who this person is and reading them. This is how you are in the world. This is what's going on. That would be more of maybe the Jupiter kind of aspect of counseling. Spiritually, this is who you are, this is your dharma, and really seeing how they relate and resonate, and okay, yeah, that makes sense. And then you have a little bit of rapport with them, and then as long as you're genuinely interested in that person and you're not just wanting to get paid, like if you really genuinely are interested in that person, then as you're doing that, hints kind of just start coming into you, and then you can try to predict, and then you look, and then it's like aha, like things kind of reveal themselves to you. I guess somehow some part of you gets more like psychically attuned. We do have to acknowledge that there is a very like right brain intuitive factor when it comes to predictions, even if we're using charts, even if we're doing a lot of calculation and all. And something just kind of comes about. It's almost like how it's a Venus thing is what I'm trying to get. It's a heart-centered thing. It's kind of like how a lover just knows when their lover is like going to be home or is about to come home, or, you just know if your husband cheated on you or something, you know what I mean? There's just this, yeah. And then you look at the chart and you almost kind of already have that feeling, and then you go with that. Now, what's tricky here is that that has to do with listening to your inner voice. When we're not able to listen to our inner voice, when we try to force that, we will create confirmation bias, or we will create just a wrong prediction because we're trying to project something or a concept that we have in our mind that isn't really coming from our inner voice, I guess. So you just learn a bunch of techniques, and then as long as let's say we're living a good lifestyle, meditating, blah, blah, we don't have a really polluted mind, then yeah, something will come up. And again, yeah, like you said, don't put too much standards on it, and be very free of criticism, and just kind of let it flow out. I mean, I can relate to that a lot. I'll tell you, Fiona, I genuinely meant to write virus in that post about Facebook, and I regretted it, and I didn't. And so I'll never forget not writing virus there and not letting myself follow my inner voice fully. Yeah. So no one's perfect there, but, and again, I can't beat myself up about that. I can't regret that. I did a good job. And I need to just embrace that. But yeah, there's always going to be something you could have done more. That's true.
Yeah, it's funny how the mind does that, isn't it? Like you get 90% of everything. So that's brilliant. And what does the mind focus on? It focuses on the 10% that we didn't get.
Yeah.
Corey, I love what you're sharing about Venus being such an important energy in this skill, because as we're recording this now, Venus is retrograde, and I feel myself that I'm learning so much more about Venus during this period. And here we are again, she's coming in. And as you say, it's not about force. So that's great timing. I wanted to, my ears pricked up when I was watching something recently about, it was a documentary about insider trading, and a notorious case in Australia where they caught a particular insider trading arrangement, a couple of gentlemen who were using information to make a lot of money on particular trades. And one of the things that struck me is that we're just talking about currencies going up and down. So we're not even talking about what we're trying to predict in Vedic astrology, which is so many interconnected elements. We're just talking about whether a currency will increase or decrease.
Right.
This particular person who was being interviewed worked for a big trading house, and he was in charge of like risk management and just watching trades and just ensuring that the company was not being defrauded. And he said that for traders, I'm just quoting from their transcript now, traders in their space, if they are above 50%, if they're above 55%, they're doing a really good job.
Wow.
And the only answer here is up or down, right? So it's not like up, down, stay the same, or up for 5 minutes, down for 2 minutes. There's no complexity. It's just binary, up, down. And here is the compliance person, and how the alarm goes off. Like he presses the alarm if he sees anybody getting over 55% on a yes/no binary. It's amazing, isn't it?
Wow.
Okay, so to wrap up what Bernadette Brady was saying, just for this part of our conversation, I have another quote from her book, and she just says, just acknowledging the simple feats of astrology, we really can consider them to be awe-inspiring. And this can allow us to take predictive work down from its pedestal by recognizing, as you were saying, Corey, these simple skills and techniques, and how how if we practice them, the minefield of prediction becomes a little less dangerous. So I really wanted to make sure that we covered in our beginning conversation that the stress that we might feel about it, and that this is something that we practice and that takes time. And then before we know it, that Venus voice is going to flow through.
Yeah. And I guess I would say also that I think it's really important that I don't want to give too much emphasis to Venus here because, all right, see, me as an astrologer, I have my K2 in a sign of Venus, and it's in Libra, which is a sign of the world. So you might say that there's already someone who has a good sensitivity to what's going on in the world. And the Lord of that is Venus going into Capricorn, which is about, time and like old things, like astrology. And Capricorn's also a sign of the world. And so I might have more, that might be my innate, whatever. I might already have some karma moving me in that way. And each person's going to have to go with what they're like really drawn to. So there's a ton of things I wouldn't be able to predict about just because I don't know. I'm not interested in them, or I don't care about them, or what have you. You have to really know your topic well. Like, so that's the thing is when I got into the financial astrology, I knew nothing about markets. I had to spend a year just learning about what does liquidity even mean? What do all these words mean? And then there's like the Mars side of it, which is just pulling the trigger, and you've got to just say what you really feel when it comes to readings and this and that. Doesn't mean you should, be a jerk or whatever, be sincere, but you've really got to just not be afraid to speak on it. Because like I said, Rahu is viruses. Everyone knows that. I knew Cancer was the lungs. I spoke about that. And yet I was afraid to write virus in that post. If you want, I don't know, you guys can go to Instagram and see it, or Fiona could maybe even read out some of the details of the post. But I basically wrote about flooding. And then I talked about how there would be respiratory issues. And then and that just came out to me. And my initial post was to post about flooding. And then as I was writing, I was like, oh, my inner voice is telling me that, yeah, this will be involving medical things too. And then kept going. And then I really wanted to write viruses are possible. And I wanted to write keep an extra 2 weeks worth of beans and rice or extra food on hand for you this winter. And I didn't write either of those things because at that time people were still, my whole life people kind of criticized me for being too like out there and saying stuff like this would happen. You know what I mean? So that it's finally about to happen. I'm finally about to tell people that I held back a little bit because of that. Yeah, so I did tell my mother, I told numerous people in my life, but I don't have it in writing. But wouldn't that have been an amazing prediction to have added that? Because, we did go into a lockdown and we really did need to have extra 2 weeks worth of food and water on hand. And yeah, but nope, I didn't say it. So that's sort of a feeling that I have when I think back on this. And I shouldn't be worried about it, but that's how it is. I guess what I really like in terms of my favorite artists, my favorite musicians, my favorite skateboarders, my favorite surfers, astrologers, they're all people who are just so into what they're doing and their passion and their thing. They couldn't care less what others are saying. And so I just try to be like that too, but I'm not perfect in that way. And so sometimes I do kind of worry about what people will think, and then I might not share something that I really should have. And so that also just basically, I guess, in a long story short, my K2 in Libra and my Rahu in Aries has basically made me be like, yeah, I need to trust my own inner voice over what I think the world might say. Does that make sense?
It really does. And in fact, what I'm hearing in this last part of what you're saying is that predictions it's like being an artist, that one is in the moment and in the flow and expressing that for the sake of expression, for the sake of honoring that muse and creating a piece of art, not for other people's are going to be wowed by this or are going to criticize this or could judge it or whatever. And that can prevent a lot of artists that kind of second guessing of how will I be critiqued about this. So we have to just get that out of our heads. And you shared with me in our prep for this, you shared some of the passages from a book by Richard Tarnas called Cosmos and Psyche, Imitations of a New Worldview. And I think you might want to talk about the content, the specific, he talks about transits in there, but there was just a short paragraph that really caught my eye. And this is obviously someone who has worked for a long time in this space. And he says, in the vast majority of cases in which I have considered the likelihood of future events, I have been surprised both by the many ways they have actually manifest beyond what I imagined, and by the ways in which they did not manifest as I might have thought or feared. And instead, and so then he goes on to say, instead, in countless instances, I have received new lessons in the infinite creativity of the cosmos. And I think as a young astrologer, that's what I find, that there are so many beautiful indicators that we're seeing. As you've mentioned, they can be about the sign, they can be about the planet, they can be about the degree that it's going on in that particular sign, they can be about the aspects that are happening. So we got a lot of imagery that can come into our imagination that we're trying to create a picture. What is actually going to happen here? And I just love the way Richard Tarnas shared this, that even though he's done this hundreds of times, he's still surprised by the things that happen and the way they beautifully, all of those things that we saw, they come into creation. And also all of the things that maybe we feared or worried, they don't come the way that we think they will, or they come in a different way. It's awe-inspiring, whether we get it right or not right.
Yeah.
The way those images come into creation is awe-inspiring. So I love that passage that you sent me.
No, it really is. He's an amazing author, and in his book, I have to give credit to that, because if I had read I had read about half of his book before the pandemic. If I had read the Saturn and Pluto chapter in its entirety, who knows? I might have leaned too far on the negative, like the world's about to end, y'all. Because I mean, just to give like a sort of a quick, actually I have some things written about it right here on this other notebook I have on outer planets, because I took a lot of notes on that book. But like Saturn and Pluto, they were conjunct in the eclipse that caused the pandemic and everything. And so many astrologers were talking about this. I have to at least give credit to Channing Ayers, because when I first time I ever hung out with Ernst at his house, Ryan and Channing had been there before, and Channing immediately brought up this eclipse. Like, this was the thing she wanted to talk about. So she really deserves so much more credit. She was pointing out that Pluto was conjunct its own south node. So not just the moon hitting the south node causing eclipse, Pluto was like essentially eclipsing itself. And this happens only like once every thousands and thousands of years. And Ernst said that, there are going to be like major survival issues during that time, and major economic issues because of it all happening in signs of Saturn, which deals with winter and it's just surviving. And he also talked about how there's going to be it would make a lot of sense for some sort of like a time when like the doctors just can't fix us, because Jupiter, he was talking about Jupiter's doctors, and Jupiter would be debilitated there. And so like because he's a big naturopath person. He's like, this will be a time when I think that stuff will move more forward. And a lot of people will lose a lot of faith in the established Capricorn aspect of health. But also I need to give credit to like Ganesh Jayakumar, another student of Ernst, who back on our studying Kala on the forum that I think is gone now, but he had the email, so he was able to make a post about this. He basically predicted the economic crash of 2020 down to February and March of 2020. So like down to, like a 2-month window. And he wrote that back in like 2017 or 2016 as well. A lot of people did a great job on this. I don't want to act like I was the only person at all. And I'm sure there are many others that I don't even know of who all pointed out unique aspects of the pandemic too, which is why it would be great for us all to collaborate more, hence the AstroliJam.
Yay!
Yeah, but Richard Tarnas, this guy is a Harvard academic, and he spent 30 years going over the outer planets and doing a ton of research. So he really needs to get more credit in the kind of academic world. But when he talked about the Saturn Pluto conjunction back in 2008 in this book, and he talked about it as a time of like intense. Basically, Saturn represents contraction and Pluto empowers things and like really revs them up. And so it would be a time of like really intense historical gravity and historical contraction. And previous things that have happened during these windows were the beginning of the Cold War was in a Saturn-Pluto conjunction. Rome was sacked by the Visigoths. the Black Death in Europe, or the plague, basically happened during a Saturn-Pluto conjunction. The first time Protestants were burned at the stake was during this. The first time the Catholic Church declared the Copernican theory to be false, and even the writing of 1984. 1984 was written during a Saturn-Pluto conjunction, and then 1984 itself was also a Saturn-Pluto conjunction during the Reagan conservative era, when we all thought we were about to go to war with Russia. So, I mean, wow, like, of course the pandemic happened. Of course there were these draconian mandates and all these, you know what I mean? It just kind of like makes sense that all these things would happen when we look at how Richard Tarnas kind of, laid it all out for us, really. And so then he even talked about how when 9/11 happened, as he was working on this book, he was like, wow, like this speaks to the work I'm doing. There are chapters of that book that almost seem like he's predicting the pandemic in advance without knowing it. Really good book, you guys. If you want to get better at predicting mundane events, even if you're a Vedic astrologer like me, you should definitely get into the outer planets. And that book, Cosmos and Psyche, will really blow your mind with regards to outer planets. But then even he says stuff like, you can't predict anything with astrology. But that's because he has his own confirmation bias, where he's only looking at very far, wide cycles, and he doesn't know anything about all the Vedic astrology stuff we do, So it is very interesting how each astrologer will open or close their mind to different things based on their own karma, skill set, and background. This is why I don't feel anyone can be a perfect predictor until they are very, very near self-realization or, something like that. It reminds me of the saying of Meher Baba said, astrology is a perfect science, but it takes a perfect one to understand it perfectly. So
I think this is so true, Corey, that when one learns to read astrology, I've come through that apprenticeship with Ryan. There's no frills. It's really learning the steps of how a chart is giving the information. So often when I read a chart, it's a very technical process. There's a lot of maths, a lot of numbers, and you're just looking at data. So you're not necessarily emotionally involved. You're being quite objective. But in that, one cannot help but notice that one's own color comes through. Every bit of data, as soon as you start to use your imagination to, well, how will this work out in the future, you start to color it with your own. So I think a real essential part of being an astrologer is having a great meditation practice, a great cleansing, clearing the mind process, because where the mistakes are in predicting they're not mostly in the facts and the astrology. They're mostly in the astrologer, aren't they? The color that we bring, our own biases. Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of funny how our own bias will color things, or will make us see things we don't want or not want. It'll make us not see things that we don't want to see sometimes, or add extra juice or something that we don't. Also, this brings up another point. We got to know our own chart. In a way, astrology even can help us with this if we can know our own chart and know our own bias. See, like I have K2 in an air sign, so I know that I can lean too much on social things. And so I know that I need to kind of maybe more trust myself. Another person who has K2 in a fire sign might actually need to go and read the news. You know what I mean? Who has Rahu in an air sign might actually need to check in with what others are saying about things, or go to our AstroliJam and hear, or you see what I'm saying? Like there's just all kinds of different, there's not going to be one right formula for us here.
Yeah. And that's another beautiful thing about astrology compared to, I've had backgrounds in other, like in the corporate world, using personality typing models, and there's just not enough differentiation between people. But in astrology, we have the opposite problem. Everybody is completely unique. So knowing yourself, you find your unique path and your unique strengths, and of course your unique weaknesses, your unique biases. Here in Portugal, we had a comedy TV show with a very famous satirist, a really great mimic and comedian named Ricardo Araújo Pereira. And he was running this like weekly show reflecting on the news and kind of comedy based on news stories. And he did a great take of all of the astrologers who'd gone on the various morning shows and had said, or tarot readers, and had said, 2020 was going to be a great year for this and a great year for that. And he was making fun of the fact that, astrologers didn't predict what was going to go on in 2020. But there were, as you've mentioned already, many astrologers who did. And Corey, you shared a post that prompted me to contact you for this episode. And your quote was, there will likely be some extreme cases of flooding in Asia and other parts of the world. There may be extreme thunderstorms and a lot of damage due to water. Capricorn rules watery ground. Cancer rules floodable tidal areas as well. The eclipses here will bring retention issues. Will bring water and flooding issues. Also, in a medical sense, more people may have water retention issues, swelling, constipation, or issues with the blood flow and the water in the body. The moon rules the circulatory, urinary, and respiratory systems. Issues could occur around that system. Saturn rules the muscular and lymphatic system, which swells up if it's not used enough. So if you're feeling cooped up, do some stretches, take a walk, keep the muscles and the lymph moving in the body, and that will help. So this was the post that you put up, and I should just date that. You may know this off the top of your head. This was on the 28th of December, 2019. So while now, in retrospect, we may say that COVID was actually spreading. For those of us in the West, we didn't really have an awareness of COVID at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Corey, how did you come to because so many of these things hit on all of the elements that we experienced in the months following this particular eclipse. So talk us through some of your process with this prediction as it came about.
Well, I think I got lucky just first. I'm not going to act like I can always do that. I at that time, my ruling planet Jupiter had just left a very strong place in Sagittarius, and I was just really kind of on fire with just my astrology overall. So I'd also, and this is kind of neither here nor there, but back earlier that September, basically the United States government the Pentagon confirmed that UFO footage was real that they had leaked. And that actually had proven a prediction that I had been kind of waiting on, because I basically you guys can check this out in a video I did on YouTube, what to expect when Saturn crosses Capricorn. I made that in 2017. And I said that in that video, UFOs will be taken very seriously by the end of Saturn leaving Capricorn, because Capricorn is the sign of things flying in the air. Chara is the word Jaimini uses. Chara, moving, space, moving in space, moving in the sky. And so I predicted that we would have major upgrades in aviation as well. And then Boeing came out with their new ships or their new planes. That was like that wasn't like a really specific prediction, but I was kind of hyped up on that. I was like, yeah, like I get this, I see this. And then that's what was funny is, so that prediction being right made me more into like mundane astrology and predicting in general and wanting to go more into it. So then I did a video with another astrologer about that prediction. And afterwards I was just kind of riffing on it and thinking about it. And I was like, oh, like Capricorn and Cancer are flooding and swelling and kapha and the threshold signs. And then I just started adding more and more to it. Like I said, as I was initially just writing the flooding post, and then I thought about the medical aspect.
All the chess pieces are in the right places, aren't they? Because like you say here, we're going to be cooped up, and we know, that it's Capricorn, and we know that Saturn's there, and we know that Pluto's there, and they're going to be accentuating this cooped up. And then we all went into lockdown. Like, what is lockdown if not being cooped up, right?
I know.
I think this is what astrology is, that the symbolism is all there, and it's just our ability to try to put words to it, because you knew all of these indicators, just as other astrologers know them too. It's just, how do we put them together in words? Okay, so then let's talk about one of the aspects that is part of this eclipse is that Jupiter was debilitated, and in a way Jupiter was eclipsed, because it was in this mess of the eclipse. Do you think that is some of the reason why astrologers, in inverted commas, didn't predict it, or why, for example, you shared the story of Channing and Ernst having a conversation with foresight, we should get ready for this. We should program something for it. And we also know that Ganesh, in his predictions, which were quite early on, sort of said, I want to put some time into really digging into this, so in the future I will. But then because of life, neither Ernst nor Channing nor Ganesh had that time to invest in this prediction and put more research into it. So it strikes me that Jupiter being part of the mix of planets, it really presented challenges for astrologers as well.
Yeah, I mean, we could say that astrologers were, fated to not know, or to only be able to do so much, maybe even. I don't know. I mean, the word fated is a big word, Jupiter debilitated was just, I was very, I can say in my personal life, I went through some of the toughest stuff personally in my life from like around the time of January 2022, like March, to where I wasn't even really able to pay attention to the pandemic until like April, because I just had my own things that was going on, and I'm ruled by Jupiter. So yeah, it got me.
Yeah, I always think it's I will always remember it because for those people in Ryan's first year of apprentices, we all started our practicum year at the very beginning of 2020. And sometimes when you take Ryan's courses, for those who have taken some of Ryan's courses, sometimes he says something like, I'm recording this at a auspicious moment, and you feel like he's really taken the time to plan out when is the time to deliver this message. And it was so classic to release your first round of apprentices into the world to do their practicum during Jupiter debilitation. I was just like, aren't astrologers going to be debilitated? And we were all just completely steamrolled by life during that practicum year. Like we just dropped those poor soldiers who jump over they come out of the trench and they start running towards the enemy, and you're just watching them kind of get popped down, because 2020 was that kind of year for everyone. We don't want to say it was exclusively like that for astrologers, but being as Jupiter is often considered to be the character of the astrologer that you go to see, it's the Jupiter. So we were all dropping like flies that year, but we did it. We made it.
Yeah, you just dropped, I don't know, a thought just came to my mind. Okay, so then I was like, well, so if Jupiter is exalted, then astrologers should do really well then on predicting world events. And then boom, that was when 9/11 happened. And a lot of astrologers did predict things about 9/11 very accurately. I don't have that data on hand with me, but I know Robert Hand predicted like September of 2001 as like a major intense time, and a few others. I don't know, but you can go and look into that. It is on record that a lot of astrologers forecasted things for 9/11, and during that time, Jupiter was exalted. So that kind of speaks to our point.
Yeah, and I was really hit in the research for this episode. I was really hit by how many of those astrologers had said, "Oh, I must look out for this coming eclipse." So it was like 4 or 5 years in advance, 3 years in advance. I can tell that this is going to be important. But then didn't, have that time to do it. And what a great metaphor that is for being debilitated and being eclipsed, is that even though we know it, the wisdom of Jupiter, even though we have the foresight because of Capricorn, let's come back to some of the things that we talked about at the beginning for people improving on their predictions. We were talking at the beginning about taking the pressure off and just being not so having these high expectations on ourselves. And also we talked about in some ways doing it for the fun of it, like an artist, do it as a work of art.
Yeah.
But let's bring in some of the practical things. So I'm gonna run through a list of things, and you can tell me which of these you think are helpful and why.
Yeah.
Do you think that prajna can be helpful? So that the skill of horary, answering a question based on the time when someone asked it, does that help?
Oh, yeah, big time. I love prajna. I go very deep into prajna. If you can do prajna, the same principles of prajna are what you can use to read the lunar New Year charts. And actually, Laura Barat is the one that kind of like really taught me how to do this. Well, Ernst and Laura, I went over a few different like ideas of mundane charts. One of the ones I could really speak to a lot is the lunar New Year chart. So I don't know if you had that written in your notes, but that's a really just something really, really amazing to look at. And that'll actually be, here's what's fun. Here's what's fun. The next new moon will be the Lunar New Year. February, it'll be in like around February 1st or 2 weeks from today. So yeah, around the beginning of February will be the new moon. And so I actually expect things to kind of get better for the world after that. So because the next Lunar New Year charts for 2022 are not nearly as awful as 2020 and 2021. And what's interesting for others to speculate on, you can go to my YouTube channel. I've done some videos on this. What's interesting is the 2021 Lunar New Year chart is almost worse. It's way worse in a lot of ways than the 2021. And that's, I don't know, it would get too much to go into all of that for this talk. But if you can do Prasna, you can kind of do the Varshafala, which is like, you can look at solar return charts for like people, and then you can also basically kind of like do the same thing, the same techniques for Lunar New Year charts, and look at like, this is the poverty saham, or this is the, this saham, and then try to time events through that. And I've even got a class on that, class 5, my financial astrology class with Laura Barat.
We'll include a link there for Corey's work on teachable.com.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you think that Rasi aspects are important when you're doing predictions?
Yeah. Rasi aspects I'm very big on. They're very underused. They were the first aspects given in Parashara's book and in most books. But traditionally, Vedic astrologers didn't use them a lot. And I actually think that's because they don't work that well unless you have the tropical zodiac. But then they work amazingly. So those of you who use tropical calculations should really experiment with Rasi aspects for sure, and in every sense. And so mundane astrology, no different. And that's the interesting thing, is that techniques that work in every system of astrology. That's really baffling to me. Like, man, but yeah, that's a whole other thing. But so you can use like really any technique that is really just a good technique will also speak to a mundane prediction, or even a market, or even the chart of Bitcoin or something, but you just have to know how to interpret it or like adjust it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. Great. Okay, so Rasi aspects is a good place to practice as well. What about Nakshatras? Do you like to use Nakshatras in your predictions?
Yeah, I use those after. All right, Rashis and the dignity and these things are going to supersede it. But then afterwards, I do use the Nakshatras to give me more details. And they actually do seem to have a big effect on mundane astrology and mundane events. That's kind of what I wanted to teach a lot of my Nakshatra course about, is that there is this very interesting emphasis where, say the widest tornado ever on record happened when there was like a big thing going on in Shatabishak, like the element of space, like Varuna, making things much wider space, like a huge space within this hurricane. Or, you'll just notice this background quality going on. I really like to use the events going on in that day. Like the chart of 9/11, we had the moon in Magha Nakshatra. Magha is a downward facing nakshatra. So the towers fell, you know what I mean? Like they go down. And it's also a cruel nakshatra. And it's a nakshatra dealing with like ancestral pride and power and like the patriarchy and things like that. And so you can kind of just like get little hints on things like that. But I try to use the nakshatras afterwards to sort of fill in details. But yeah, I do have some good examples. Yeah, I do have some good examples of that in the course that I've got planned. It's not really fresh in my mind, though. I wish I could think of a better one.
That's all right. Good. So we're pointing people in the direction of nakshatras. What about, do you use a lagna? Like, obviously, if you're doing prediction for a particular country, you might get a lagna for that country. But what do you use as an ascendant for planet Earth? Or if you want to look at something that's going to affect the whole planet?
Oh, that's a good question. So I'd love to hear what I'll have to say 10 years from now, because I'm so beginning at this mundane astrology. So I might look back on this and laugh. But yeah, the best techniques I found. There's a standard in Western astrology. They have a cool idea of okay, when you have the Aries ingress, you calculate that chart of the moment the sun goes to 000 Aries, and then wherever like whatever's rising at that moment in your capital will be your rising sign. So that's one really cool thing. So you would calculate Washington, D.C. from the moment of spring on the equinox, and you can read it. And then you can even get more specifically and calculate when it ingresses into Cancer and when it ingresses into Libra and Capricorn. So for each season, you can get like a 3-month chart. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah.
And that works pretty well. And there's enough Western astrologers out there. Then Laura Barat showed me, Corey, you really want to get wild, do the same thing, but do the Lunar New Year chart, the Chinese Lunar New Year chart, which is what I just explained, how in February, like early February, we're going to have a new Lunar New Year chart. Then I would calculate that from Washington, D.C., and whatever is rising then is going to be like the rising sign for America for that whole year. And then what's fascinating is China will have the opposite rising sign. You know what I mean? Because it's on the opposite side of the planet. And boy, when I looked at like the 2020 stuff, man, it was interesting how China and USA and these things kind of like played out and lined up. And I think that that's something that we can really go deep on. And I tried to. I looked at for 2021, there was a big planetary war going on between Venus and Jupiter in the Lunar New Year chart for this past year. Venus and Jupiter are the Brahmins. They are the doctors of modern day society. So there was a war with the doctors going on this last year. Really fascinating. Then I went further and I was like, oh my God, like India is ruled by this sign. Russia's ruled by this sign. China's ruled by Capricorn. You know, these are, oh my God, this is how they're all like playing out and battling with each other. It was really fun. And then I just kind of got distracted by other stuff and said, like, the thing is that there's no one who pays the bills to do that for me. So I just do that when I have time. Lunar New Year charts, I highly recommend looking at that. There's another thing, though, that I haven't even had time to study and research enough, as much as I'd like at least, but it's working pretty well so far, is using the bhava lagna. I started to experiment with this for Bitcoin because Bitcoin is the same way. It's decentralized. So no one country owns it. No one owns it. The people own it. And so, yeah, how can you chart it? How can I do a Prasna to know if Bitcoin's going to go up or down? Because on the other side of the world, the chart is the exact opposite and it's still doing the same thing, right?
Love that, Corey. Exactly.
Right?
Talk us through that. Yeah.
It's very complex and tricky. And so I'm still like this all last year, all 2020, I've been a mad scientist trying to figure this out. And for crypto and things like that, but it's also to get better at mundane astrology just in general. And so the bhava lagna is this Jaimini technique. He gives 3 different time lagnas. These were calculated off of this ancient place called Yamakoti that doesn't even exist according to the world. And the Indian books give the coordinates for it. And it's off the coast of Japan.
Okay.
Yeah, this is getting into some wild stuff here. But you basically, for certain Jaimini Raja yogas, you have to calculate these 3 lagnas. He calls them the time lagnas. And it's the Gatika Lagna, the Bhava Lagna, and the Hora Lagna. Take Ernst Wilhelm's level 3 Jaimini course for those who are fascinated by this. But basically, these change at different windows and different times. And this is one thing that is basically, this is one Lagna for everyone at all times. So I started experimenting with that. And it was, I don't have enough information on it, but so far it's looking pretty promising and pretty cool.
That gives people lots of places to go. We've got the ingress, the solar ingress into Aries. We've got those lunar charts that we could also look at. And if people want to follow through with Jaimini 3 from Ernst Wilhelm, they're going to get this other idea of a lagna that might apply regardless. And I love what you're saying about Bitcoin. You know, it has no place where it belongs. So yeah, I love that.
Right. Yeah, it's very tricky.
Yeah. So I guess another thing to get better at predictions is practice, right? Just like we do with the practicum year on the apprenticeship, we supervise our apprentices for 42 readings because you've got to get out there and learn how to.
Wow, 42 readings?
42 readings, and where the client gives feedback and the astrologer gives feedback and the assessor also reads all of this and gives feedback. So, but it's like that for predictions as well, isn't it? That at some point, you was talking about it with that Mars impulse. We just have to just do it. And your first prediction won't be perfect and your 10th prediction won't be perfect, but you're going to get feedback and learn as you have the courage to begin.
Yeah. And it's really exciting. And like you said, if you can even do anything, that's so amazing, right? So, yeah.
Yeah. How do you deal with the persona aspect? Because there is a little bit of a YouTube kind of persona thing where people are putting out predictions and they're putting themselves on the line, and one has to develop a kind of, I don't know, like an attitude towards that publicity or towards that vulnerability. How have you dealt with that? Do you have any tips about remaining the artist in that public world? So you're being true to the art and not being too influenced by people's judgments.
I guess, yeah. I mean, I guess I feel like I was overly afraid of having the imposter feeling, you could say.
Yes.
And so I overly prepared, I have stacks and stacks of notebooks and things. So yeah, in a lot of ways I can relate to that. I mean, Ryan, everyone told me like, dude, Ryan told me I should have had a YouTube channel back in like 2013. It wasn't really until maybe like 2018 and 2019 when I really settled into myself. And I felt like I was growing a lot more spiritually and things were kind of all finally coming into place for me. But before that, I used to just, it was a lot more stressful. It was a lot harder for me to just talk, to do anything. To do this interview, I would have had to like sweep my whole house and like do all these weird idiosyncratic things, you know what I mean? Just to feel like I could, right? And that's just nonsense. So I just like to do it like being like a skater, I kind of want to be like, I don't care what you think, really. At the end of the day, like I said, it's the best artists, the best skaters, they just did the tricks they wanted to do. And lately I've just been trying to free myself of criticism. Like I wrote that on the board, just free yourself of self-criticism. And for January, go about your day and just do what you want to do. What do you think, Fiona?
Well, I think it's something that that I notice with the astrologers that I tutor and the world that I'm growing with, where they are apprentices, that perhaps maybe it prevents women more, but I don't know, that there's a fear of how one's going to be perceived and the fear of putting one's public comments out there. So I just wanted to ask if you had any tips. And I think it's great what you're saying about balancing one's life and not putting all of your eggs in this basket of being the be all and end all. And I like what you're saying about skaters. Often I think about surfers because I'm Australian and I live in Portugal. There's lots of surfing but skating is the same, that when you're watching people skateboard or when you're watching people surf, there's a lot of crashing out. There's the best surfers in the world are crashing out a lot. And this comes back to that 50% thing that we were saying, that of course, if you go to YouTube and you see a great big wave here at Nazaré, you're going to see someone ride the whole way down that, and then it's going to tube and they're going to go through it. And it's just like, wow. But you didn't see the 400 other takes that day where it was just slam, crash, burn. And maybe that's what I'm going to take away from my conversation with you today, Corey, is to see prediction more as an art, something that I'm doing for the enjoyment of the art and for creating a piece of art that reflects the imagery of the indicators, and just enjoy that and not get too hung up on, but is it right? Is it not right? Should I have said that or not said that? Just create art. So that's my takeaway from our conversation today.
That's a good takeaway.
All right. So I want to give a great big thank you to Corey Dowds for being here and so generously sharing with us your experience of being a predictive astrologer, your tips and tricks and techniques, and some great things for us to take away. And I also want to remind all of those of you who are still listening that Corey and I are going to get together and host a jam where you can research the same chart that we're researching. You can come and bring your thoughts, and maybe you're halfway there and you want to say, look, I see something like this, but I'm not sure where to take it. And we might have seen the same thing or something different. And we're really cross-pollinating and inspiring each other in a collaborative way. That is AstroliJam on the 6th of February. I've put the link here in the description for you. I hope you'll come along and jam with us.
Yeah, and it won't be recorded or on YouTube or any of that, right? So we can just be ourselves and not worry about any of the things we just mentioned, right?
Yeah, the criticism and the persona. That's right. Let's just enjoy this as a moment in present time. Great. Thanks a lot, Corey. Really looking forward to seeing you in February. Thanks so much for your time. And I recommend to everyone to go ahead and look at Corey's new courses that are up on Teachable right now. Follow the link and take advantage of this great knowledge that Corey has been developing about prediction.
Sounds good. Thank you. Thank you for having me on here.
Great, Corey. Catch up with you again soon. Bye, everyone.